I'd like to thank everyone who has organized this conference and also to thank Mr. Hassan, Mohammed Hassan, for inviting me to speak. And you know, there's that oft-repeated kind of cliche that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Well, I'm definitely in the right room because I feel that I'm surrounded by so many incredibly talented people, and I'm a bit ill-equipped to give a talk to all of you. But if you'll indulge me, I'll share some of my observations on this topic. So I've gone to many conferences in Pakistan over the years, and the type of conference I typically go to, as you can imagine, is focused on international relations or politics, and the attendance tends to be diplomats, politicians, government officials, academics, think tankers. And those types of conferences are important in their own right. But I think this conference is quite unique because it's different. Here we have innovators, entrepreneurs, and the private sector. And I think it's important for Pakistan to host conferences like that. And what also makes this conference unique versus other conferences I've attended in Pakistan is that Pakistan is the location of the conference, but it's not the main topic. It's been quite refreshing to see some of the more important ideas of our time globally being discussed in Pakistan, but not exclusively in terms of how they impact Pakistan. But Pakistan's taking its place as one of the great nations of the world and hosting fora in which we actually talk about global issues in Pakistan. So I want to commend those who organized this conference for all of that. Now, I was listening to this morning's session, and I found myself in agreement with many of the speakers. But as an American, I couldn't help but think that Pakistanis and Americans share this common trait of being our own worst critics. And I think sometimes thinking that our respective countries are exceptionally dysfunctional. I often hear Pakistanis talk about Pakistan as if it's an exceptionally dysfunctional country, and Americans do the same thing, frankly. Yet the issues that Pakistan faces right now that were talked about extensively in the morning sessions, there are models from around the world that have been demonstrated to be able to address and overcome those issues. So I think that even though incremental change is difficult to see, the issues that Pakistan faces are not insurmountable right now. So with that in mind, I'd like to talk about US-Pakistan relations, and by extension, Pakistan's relations with the world, and this idea of a geo-economic reset. I first started hearing the term geo-economic reset being thrown around by Pakistani politicians and former Prime Minister Imran Khan's government. Mueed Yusuf used to talk about it. Former Chief of Army Staff General Bajwa used to talk about it, and the current government uses that phrase as well. And I would hear it over and over and over again. And in my understanding, the idea of a geo-economic reset is that relations between Pakistan and the United States and Pakistan and the world have been too narrowly focused on security and the war on terror, and that a healthier relationship between the United States and Pakistan and the rest of the world would be broader. It would be about people-to-people ties, it would be about trade, it would be about infrastructure, it would be about investment. Or as Mr. Hassan said today, foreign policy should be about economic interests, right? And I agree with that. But to place this idea of a geo-economic reset in context, so it's not just merely a catchphrase, I think we need to consider the last 20 years of US-Pakistan relations and what it really revolved around. I think US-Pakistan relations in the post-9/11 era were really held hostage by short-term outcomes in Afghanistan and in the war on terror. You used to hear this phrase, AFPAC, which I really disagreed with because with all due respect to Afghans in Afghanistan, which is a great country in its own right, it was absolutely delusional to attach the fate of Pakistan, a country of over 200 million people, to outcomes in a landlocked country of 40 million people. But yet that was how the United States defined its policy towards this region for years. We would talk about AFPAC. And even in that context, when we would talk about development, trade, aid, infrastructure, it was always within the context of the war on terror. We should have more aid so that we can win the war on terror. There should be more investment in infrastructure so that Pakistan could help us win the war on terror, and so forth. It was never thought of in its own right, for the most part. I'm making a generalization here. And I remember in October, this last October, the Biden administration released its new national security strategy, which is published on the internet, and it didn't mention Pakistan once. And I remember speaking to some friends in Pakistan, and they were quite concerned. They said, why isn't Pakistan in this document? You know, Pakistan is a relevant nation. It should be in the national security strategy. And I said to them, you should be happy that Pakistan wasn't listed in the national security strategy. Other countries like Switzerland and France weren't listed in the national security strategy. It's not a good thing necessarily to be in the national security strategy. And if Pakistan had been included in the national security strategy, it wouldn't have been for reasons that Pakistanis would have liked, I guarantee that. So I actually saw the absence of Pakistan from the national security strategy as a clear indication that, hey, we've moved beyond the war on terror. We've moved beyond the war in Afghanistan, even though it's obviously not resolved. But there's an opportunity for a new chapter in US-Pakistan relations that can be broader and isn't going to be held hostage by the war on terror. And when Senator Sher Rahman was speaking about climate change, it got me thinking. What she said, that Pakistan is a postcard of the future, really resonated with me. I was lucky enough to visit Swat this summer, just before the floods, and then I went back to the United States, and I remember seeing videos of the floods, and the Swat River was literally running through the towns of Swat as if the roads had become part of the river. And I remember I thought to myself, climate change is wreaking more havoc and more destruction than any terrorist group could ever dream of. And I don't mean to say that terrorism is not still a threat. The terrible events of Peshawar are proof that it still is a threat. But it pales in comparison to climate change. So I think that Senator Sher Rahman's comments were really important about how it's a non-traditional threat and the world doesn't yet understand it, but this is going to be the threat of our century. And I think Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said the same thing, to leave behind the preoccupations of the last century and focus on the threats of this century and the problems of this century. And so I think the climate change crisis is also a wake-up call for the United States and Pakistan and the world that, look, for too long we've been just focused on threats that are not existential when there are other threats that very much are existential. So Pakistan has factors that I think make it inherently important. Pakistan is a country of over 200 million people. Pakistan, according to a McKinsey report, has a middle class or upper middle class, depending on how you define it, of 19 million people. And that's a middle class that's larger than the upper middle class of Germany, for example. There's a huge young population. The median age in Pakistan is just 23 years old. For perspective, in the United Kingdom, it's 41 years old. Now, that can be a liability for Pakistan and the world, or it can be an asset, depending on what's done today and in the near future. But Pakistan is projected to be the third most populous country by 2050, and it's a strategic location for more than just security. So in that context, I think a geoeconomic reset seems quite evident, or at least the value of one. The trouble with the push for a geoeconomic reset, besides the fact that it's being managed by technocrats, is that it's held hostage to the same kinds of dysfunctions that hold broader relations hostage. There's the shadow of the IMF bailout that's always looming and whether it will happen. There's inflation and currency devaluation. There's a regulatory framework in Pakistan that's not particularly conducive to growth. Ease of doing business is improving, but it's still difficult. Slow reforms, brain drain, and a sense of hopelessness, especially this time around with the IMF crisis, that I think there's a particular sense of hopelessness that if this doesn't come through, what's going to happen? But the crux of these crises in Pakistan are that the country needs to produce more and earn more. And I think we've heard from a lot of folks today who are coming up with innovative ideas and ways for that to happen. This morning, Mr. Qureshi, when he made his remarks, asked, what does Pakistan offer the world? And one thing I'd say is potential. Now, I was speaking to a prominent Pakistani businessman this summer, and I won't say his name, but he said the word potential and Pakistan, or the word potential should be banned when talking about Pakistan. He said that Pakistani diplomats shouldn't be allowed to say the word potential anymore because it doesn't mean anything. What's needed instead is an increased productivity, job creation, and opportunities for real growth. But I do think those opportunities exist in agriculture, which was mentioned this morning, in value-added textiles, not just the textile industry that exists today, but value-added textiles that can earn the country more money. And of course, IT and IT-enabled services. In fiscal year 2022, export earnings topped $2.3 or $2.6 billion, depending on how you calculate it, in the IT and IT-enabled services for Pakistan. And Pakistan startups raised $371 million in 2021 and $374 million in 2022. And that reduction was something that was global, not just for Pakistan. And since the theme of this conference is disruption, I think it's safe to say that Pakistan can take advantage of the disruption that's occurring in the rest of the world and use it to its own advantage if it's shrewd about things. For example, COVID-19 and the normalization of remote work could be a boon for Pakistan's IT sector, as it's simply become more standard to outsource IT services. The trend was already that way. Thank you. The trend was already going in that direction, but I think the COVID-19 epidemic solidified it. Sanctions on countries like Russia, that can be an opportunity for Pakistan, even though I know that the war in Ukraine has very much hurt Pakistan in other ways. But as an example, many of the engineers who major corporations and startups in the United States used as remote engineers and programmers were based in Russia. They can no longer use those individuals. That's an opportunity for Pakistan. My point being that Pakistan can actually take advantage of this very chaotic environment if it takes advantage of opportunities as they arise. Pakistan produces 25,000 IT grads per year. Let's say even if only 5,000 to 10,000 of those grads are of a quality who can seek foreign employment, that's still a significant sum of money coming into Pakistan, moving away from the model of remittances from the Gulf and towards a model where Pakistanis are being paid inside Pakistan for work they do inside Pakistan and money that they can immediately spend inside Pakistan. And I think Mr. Qureshi's idea that he mentioned this morning about creating a national training program is excellent and probably needed. And of course, the Pakistani state would also have to address tax issues and infrastructure issues such as internet and power for this to truly live up to its full potential. But the point is these opportunities exist. Well, I know that we're running short on time today, and I don't want to ramble on too long. But in short, I think Pakistan is a good long-term bet. I really do believe that, and I'm very aware that I'm saying that in an environment where a lot of Pakistanis are hurting, and the future of the country seems unknowable at this time. But I think in the long term, people sometimes say, look, Pakistan is too big to fail, and that's why the IMF will come through. I disagree with that framing. I think Pakistan is too big not to succeed. But of course, that will require a step away from this kind of grandiose thinking about magical fixes and a look at real, sustainable, incremental change. And many of those ideas have been discussed in far more nuanced detail than I possibly could today. And I think from the outside, from Pakistan's friends, including the United States, what will be required is viewing Pakistan for what it is rather than through a very skewed and narrow security lens. So I look forward to the future of U.S.-Pakistan relations, and I look forward to learning from the rest of you today and tomorrow. Thank you.